Hey y'all, Fred here. Thanks so much for joining me today. We're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about strops and stropping and how to do it and different compounds, how to clean it, when to clean it, all that fun stuff. As always, if you haven't already, go down below here, hit that subscribe notification bell if you're not already subscribed. Otherwise, throw me a thumbs up if you got to leave early. That certainly helps us on the YouTube algorithm, so I appreciate all of that. You know, I always make the assumption that just, well, everybody must know about stropping and what kind of strops to use and compounds and how to make it work and how much should I do and what direction and how many strokes. And all of that's a very learning experience. I'm certainly not an expert on this by any stretch, but I've obviously done it a few times, and I've had to strop a lot of knives. When you deal with the kind of knives that we tend to deal with on this channel, they might get dull a little bit faster than your normal high-end M390 Magna Cut type steels. So I do a lot of stropping around here. So I thought, you know, I'll do a quick little video to talk about what I like, what I've learned, maybe share some secrets with you and see if this might help somebody out there. If this is helpful to you or if you got any additional tips you'd like to share with us, by all means, go down below in the comments. I love hearing from y'all. I have learned a lot and hope to continue learning a lot from y'all. Start with the kind of strop. So both of these strops are cheap. I bought, I think, one on Temu and one on Amazon. This one's probably a little bit better of a quality. You can see it's got more lines in it, which typically means a slightly denser wood. I'm not sure if that's ash. This could just be a pine. Hard for me to tell. I'm not a wood expert, but I do know that I didn't pay more than, I think, 12 bucks for either one of these. They are double-sided strops. I would certainly encourage you to get that. You can see both of these have a rough side, which is what they call split side, split grain side, and then a smooth side, which I think they call just the grain side. And so that was always a big question for me. Am I supposed to use the rough side? The crayon stuff doesn't really stick to the smooth side very well. I did learn a great trick, and that's what I want to show you here today. Obviously, different widths. The thickness doesn't matter so much. You do want to have a good quality one. This is actually the one I use probably more than any, and you can see it came with, or I've put probably a couple of good dents in it. And there's another little bit of a dent down there you can barely see with the light. I don't think that one affects too terribly much, and really, I don't think any of that. It's this, I'll tell you, still works like a champ for me. So the question becomes rough side versus smooth side. I've done a lot of research on this. You'll find this a bunch of online groups for like kitchen knives and carving tools. There's big forums online for carving tools and how they keep their carving tools in tip-top shape. They want razor-sharp cutting tools as well. Obviously, kitchen knives are designed to be razor-sharp and thin, and so you'll get a lot of stropping advice from those guys. And what I have found out there basically is that it's a 50-50 split. If you go look on those forums, there's always experts everywhere that'll tell you, oh, I only use the split grain rough side. I only use the smooth side. But by and large, if you go and look at 100 different answers to this question, you'll find a roughly even split, with probably most people saying, I use both sides, actually, of the strop here. And they both may have a purpose. I tend to use the rough side when I know I have a knife that needs a little bit more love, needs, it's a little more extra dull, and it needs more work to bring it back to hair shaving sharp at least. I'll start with the rough side, usually do 4 or 5 passes on each side. We'll look at that in a minute. And then I'll flip often and finish it on the smooth side. This one is a black leather. I've stripped all the compound, at least all that I could get off of it. This is my green strop. So we're going to put some green rubbing compound on here because I want to show you a couple of tricks for that. I also have tried to get it off of here, although it has at this point saturated down in here, so this is why it has a greenish tint to it, although we're going to make it a lot more green here in just a second, because one of the things, well, let's talk about the colors first. So I had to make myself a little cheat sheet. You may have been looking at this. The white is an aluminum oxide. That is a more coarse grain. So you would want to use that before you would then potentially go to the green, which is the chromium oxide. Now, that is not universal. There are different color crayons out there that are probably not these exact types, and they'll be in different let's call them grits. These are usually 1,000 to 5,000 grits, so these are obviously where you want to finish your knives at. I almost never, I don't want to say never, I almost never use the white, to be honest with you. I've dedicated this one obviously to the white compound, and you can see one of the ways you can tell when your strop is getting dirty, which this one is not, it's a little dirty. You can see how this got black areas as you're wiping your steel. Doesn't come from the black in the blade, it comes from the actual silver steel part. As you're using that strop over time, it's slowly wearing away little micro bits of steel, and that shows up as black on here. So when your strop turns mostly black, and it's going to be much worse than this, that's the point in which you want to clean your strop, okay? So that goes for green as well. It's harder to tell on a black strop with green stropping compound because it's already black, and am I just wearing through, etc., etc. You'll see it. You'll learn it, though. I typically don't use the white very often. There's no particular reason I don't. I could, I should. When I'm stropping, I'm usually just using my green compound and stropping it right on this, using both these sides, and it's always been plenty good enough for me. So I'm starting out, obviously, with my 𝗬𝗶𝘃𝗃. We did some cut testing with it. It's not terribly dull, okay? And that's when you want to sharpen, but you can hopefully see the edges of this cut are not very clean. They're a little bit of a tear, kind of rough edges, right? And that's when you want to strop, is before it gets, terribly dull where it won't even cut paper at all. If it starts hanging up in some spots, that wasn't a hangout. My blade just pulled out of the cut. This is the point at which I'm going to strop back my knives. Now, do you absolutely need to? No, this thing will keep on cutting for a long time before I really need to, but I like just topping it off. What you'll find is if you top off kind of that blade edge periodically before it gets too dull, then you'll almost never have to put it on a real sharpening system to sharpen it up. So keep it in tip-top, at least hair shaving sharp. And you'll almost never have to, unless you just really have to abuse your knife in some particular situation. All right, so let's put some stropping compound, because this was the next problem I ran into when I did it. Now, unfortunately, I've already applied the trick to this one, but what you'll find a lot of times is that you're going to end up with, let's close this knife before we do any damage. You're going to end up with thick patches of it in some places. This smooth side will be easier, okay? So let's do this. All right, that's not good enough, right? If you've seen the pros, but it doesn't rub in either. So what do you do? How do those pros get their strop to be a uniform color all the way across? Because you don't want your knife passing through thick globs of rubbing compound. This is like, sharpening it on a stone. This is like a stone. So you don't want parts of your blade hitting this thick rough patch and then the other parts, not getting hit at all. How do you fix that? The solution is a cheap $7 bottle of mineral oil. I use food grade. You don't want obviously any kind of weird chemicals or anything like that. You can get these everywhere. You can get them at your local drugstore, your grocery stores. You can buy it on Amazon. Again, $5 to $10 will get you this giant bottle, which will probably last you pretty much a lifetime. And that's the secret. That's what I didn't know until I went out and researched this for myself. And watch what happens. There's something about that mineral oil. I am not rubbing hard, by the way. I'm just going to first coat it all the way over, just kind of thin out that mineral oil. But look what happens after a little while as you start rubbing it in, just with your finger. And again, I'm not using hard pressure here. I'm just using kind of light to medium pressure. It begins to dissolve that waxy crayon. What is the green one, do we say? It's chromium oxide is the green stuff. So I'm just melting in all those thick globs and spots, and now what I want to do is try to just spread it out over the surface of this, of the strop itself. So 2 minutes, I don't know. I don't know if you started a timer. You can go back and figure out when I started with this, but 1 minute, maybe 1 to 2 minutes, and now look how thin and evenly that is. Now, this is not perfect because it's still very wet. So what you want to do is get a dirty rag that you don't mind or you're going to use for this whole thing, and that's what all this is this black. I'm going to dab, just try to get some of that excess oil off here without actually taking off. Now, here's a perfect intro to cleaning your strop. So let's say you've been using this strop now and it's turned from green to black because it's filled up with the steel of all your knives. Plus, while you have it wet, you can also always come in and add a little bit more, because that will begin to melt the wax on your crayon as well. It's not hot. It's not like heat waxing. It's just some kind of chemical transition of some sort. So feel free to add more on. But where I was going with that is cleaning your strop. When you decide, okay, it's time to clean and refresh this strop, which is what I did before the video started, should have waited and did that on camera, is you do the exact same thing. You pour a bunch of mineral oil on it and take your rag and just literally wipe it right off. It just wipes off as smooth as it just smoothed out with my fingers. Now, that's obviously wet, and it's going to stay wet for probably 24 hours because it's oil. It's not going to dry right away. That will absorb into the leather fairly quickly, leaving you with a relatively nice and smooth sheen of chromium oxide on top of your strop. I'll usually on day 2 come back and do what I just did there, put another layer on top, and Bob's your uncle, good to go, right? So I'm gonna have to let that dry. I don't want to use that to strop right now, because if I run my knife across that, it's just gonna literally scrape it all off the top again. So you gotta let it dry and absorb in, which the mineral oil will. Like I said, give it overnight, come back, maybe put a second coat on there, and then that will last you for months. Depends on how often you strop your knives. I strop mine pretty frequently. That'll easily last you for months. In terms of knives and stropping, I don't know, 40 knives, 30 to 50 knives ought to be able to be stropped with this layer right here once it dries in a little bit. So it's a lot. Same thing on this side, right, which I started on this side and didn't really finish, but I'm going to put a better layer. This side is a little bit easier. Now, yours won't look like this when you first put it on your rough side, because your rough side is probably going to be very dry. This strop has been oiled so many times, just like you just saw me do there, that it's already wet. And so the compound, once it's kind of oiled and wet, that compound just easily spreads right across the surface like that. So this is pretty good. This is good to go. It's not very oily. You can use your finger and rub it in if you think any spots are thicker than others, but this side is pretty much good to go right now. So we saw how well that cut or didn't cut just a minute ago. Let's talk about strokes and how you do it. Rough side versus soft side. Again, 50-50. People say I use the smooth. 50% say I just use the rough. 50%, the other 50% says I use both sides, and that's what I tend to do. 4 or 5 strokes on each side. Like this, then I would switch over once this is dry and alternate my strokes. Let's talk about the strokes, because you'll see I do it a little differently than you see a lot of people do it. Here's why other people will go tip first, and I like the tip first method. I'm just really trying to figure out what I like. Here's why tip first works. So I just did a sharpening video on my WorkSharp Pro, sharpening up one of my knives. And as I'm sharpening it with the stones, I'm using this pattern going this way across the knife as I'm sharpening it with the real diamond stones. What that does is it leads all of the kind of the micro angles on the edge of that blade to be angled that way, right? And that way, if I'm cutting something, the angles, there's we're talking microscopic, right, points, peaks on the edge, very edge of your blade. If they're angled that way, they dig into the material and cut a little bit better. Well, you don't want to strop then to remove those angles that you just took your time sharpening into your knife. So in that case, you would go tip to heel, and that way you maintain those little angles. So that's why you'll see a lot of pros, you know, I think 𝗍𝗓s typically does point first. I've seen a lot of other guys out there as well. And again, I'm nowhere even close to 𝗍𝗓's universe, let alone his neighborhood in terms of my skills or experience doing this. I'm just trying to share what I have learned so far. So tip to heel, tip to heel. Now, the most important thing is when you get done with that end stroke, do not roll that blade over and let it touch the strop, because what you're talking about a microscopic edge bevel on the very edge of this, so small you can't see it with the naked eye. If you rub that across the strop, all you've done is just bend that over. You just created a burr to curve that edge of that steel up. Well, that doesn't cut well. So you have to, as you make your stroke, make sure you lift cleanly, then turn it over and start again, and lift cleanly, turn it over, and start again. It takes a little getting used to when you first do it. Once you've done it a bit, it becomes muscle memory. But that's one of the big mistakes a lot of new people make, and I made it myself when you're getting started, is not lifting that blade cleanly at the end of each pass, right? Lift, flip. You have to really train yourself to lift and flip. If you're not paying attention, or if you're paying attention to something else, you're watching TV while you're stropping your knives, you may find that you are hurting yourself more than you're helping yourself. The other thing is how many passes to make. Well, the answer is as many as it takes to get the knife as sharp as you want it, right? What angle to do. So you can see here, it's hard to see. I'm about a 20-degree angle, I'm going to say. Do you have to be? So I sharpen, well, this is probably a 24-degree. I didn't sharpen this knife on the sharpening system, so it's probably about a 24-degree angle. Do I have to find exactly 24 degrees in my up or down tilt on that? No, doesn't really matter. This is soft enough where you should not be ruining your edge. Now, if you sit here and strop it 100 times per side, yeah, you're basically resharpening your knife to whatever angle, and because you're not holding a truly consistent angle each time, you're probably going to mess up your edge. But if you're just doing 10, 15, 20 strokes even per side, you should be fine. Let's see if that has helped any. So yeah, it doesn't feel like it's incredibly sharp. Let's see if I feel it here. Okay, so that definitely has made a difference. Let's zoom in. So I should have saved my first side cut, but we're definitely getting smoother now, okay? It cut cleanly and easily. I mean, most people would say, yeah, that's as sharp as you can get it. But I'm going to tell you, I have a lot of knives that are actually even sharper than that still. So I'd probably do a few more passes. Also be careful about contaminating with other foreign objects in your stuff on top of your surface here. You don't want anything else that could cause you to ruin that micro beveled edge on the edge there. All right, I think I'm gonna end with that, because this is basically good for wear. I'll probably do another 10 or 15 strokes just to, again, try to get it a little bit more. But I mean, that's a fully functional, good cutting knife right there. One other thing I want to mention is the guided field sharpener. So I do use this quite a bit. If my edge is a little worse, or if I know I'm using a pretty soft steel, like a lot of these replica knives we get, or maybe a 5CR or even 8CR13 steels that maybe not heat treated the best, I almost never use this, because I have a Work Sharp guided, you know, the big Pro precision sharpening system. This does work, and these are 20-degree edges, and so you could, you know, this tells you how to tilt your knife. By the way, that also tells you about the angle that you want to hold it when you're on the board here, right? That's about the same angle you want to get when you're stropping. I rarely use these, although a lot of people do, and they do work. If you're not sure which side is which, it will tell you. One of them says coarse. So this is the coarse side. It is hard to tell just by touch alone, because there's not a tremendous amount of difference. This one doesn't say fine. It has instructions, but it doesn't say fine. You just know the other side's the coarse side. You start there and then do this. This is if you're out literally in the field and you had an incredibly dull knife and you got to basically almost reprofile the edge, then you'd use the metal. But what I will do very often is use the ceramic rod, especially for, again, my replica knives where I know it's a relatively soft steel. I can do about 10 passes on, I use the smooth side, although there's a coarse as well on here. I won't do a whole thing on how to use this sharpening. There's lots of videos about there. But just know there's a coarse that has basically grooves in it, and then a fine. With either the coarse or the fine, depending on how bad the blade is, 10 passes or so, you can literally feel the burr on the edge of the knife, right? Use your fingernail right off the edge of that bevel, right off the edge of the knife blade, and you'll feel if it's sticking up in there, and then you switch it over and do 10 passes here. That's how you can basically micro bevel. You're not putting a whole new angle on it. You're almost putting another second tip on it in addition to the first, original tip. But it's good enough for all intents and purposes. And you can see I've loaded this up with green stropping compound as well. And this also makes a great strop out in the field, if this is all you had, this would be all you would really need. You don't have to have a big, wide strop for this to be effective and work. I have sharpened many a knife with just this tool right here. Obviously, it's easier with the bigger one. I'll put a link down below. You've seen these, I'm sure, before, but I just wanted to mention it because this actually is a really good tool. It's surprisingly effective at touching up knives that need maybe even just a little bit more love than a strop alone can give it. This ceramic rod with the fine and the coarse edges on here work wonders in particularly the cheaper knives with cheaper steels. You know, if you had a real M390 or Magna Cut or a better quality steel, you might be at it a little while, although this is still great for touching up even those steels as well. This would be a touch-up. This would almost be like you're stropping for the cheaper knives, where softer steels are going to strop back very quickly that have low edge retention, a little bit softer than some of the harder steels that we've just talked about. Anyhow, just wanted to mention that because this really is a fantastic tool and does everything you need all in one little package. But everybody needs to have a strop, and you need to have mineral oil, because that's how you make all of this magic happen over here, instead of looking like a kindergartner's crayon painting that somehow exploded. Hopefully that's helpful to y'all. Let me know down in the comments if I missed anything, or you'd like to hear any other versions of this or any other directions or guidance. I'm trying to look at my notes real quick to make sure. We talked about the stroke directions, how many, 10, 15, test it, do another 10 or 15. That's how many strokes until you get it where you want it, until it's as sharp as you want it to be, basically. And if that's not getting it at all, then you probably are so dull you need a real work sharpener type device. All right, thanks so much. I appreciate y'all. Again, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe notification bell. Throw me a thumbs up if I did okay today. Otherwise, throw me a thumbs down. Let me know what to do differently. Otherwise, I appreciate y'all. We'll see you on the next video. Take care.